Hey guys, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to tell you one of the craziest true crime stories I've ever heard. I'm obviously familiar with most of the serial killers from the US and other places, but Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or others have nothing on this guy. This guy from Colombia named Luis Garavito had killed between 140 and 200, mostly boys, and also had molested about 200 others. So, absolutely horrific crimes. And so, the story isn't just crazy because of what he did and the number of the victims, which of course is horrendous, but also because of the sentencing laws in Colombia, which are like way too lenient, in my opinion. And in the background, I'll play some of the videos of my trip in Colombia just to give you an idea of what it looks like. He didn't necessarily commit crimes in the towns I was in, but it just gives you an idea of what it looks like there. So, Luis Garavito was born in 1957 in Hanova, Colombia. It's probably not a surprise that he came from a dysfunctional family. His parents often fought, and his father berated and beat him and his other siblings, and he was picked on at school. His father removed him from school in fifth grade so he could financially help the family. Around the time when he was 12, his father took him to get vaccinated, and the guy giving the vaccination molested Luis, who happened to be a religious guy and happened to be a neighbor. Following this abuse, Luis killed and dissected a couple of birds and sexually fondled his younger siblings and molested a 6-year-old boy. His family said he became aggressive, more withdrawn, and ready to take revenge on the world. Around the time he was 14 or 15, he began drinking, and he tried having a girlfriend, but that didn't work out. His mother ended up kicking him out a couple of times, the first time for molesting a 5-year-old boy, and later he did the same thing to a 6-year-old boy at a train station in Bogota, which is the capital. The boy in the second case screamed, and the police came, and Garavito told him that he didn't want to rape the child but lightly molest him. His father reprimanded him, not for molesting the boy necessarily, but for not choosing a female. And this is when he was kicked out of his house for the last time. So throughout his life, he worked several different jobs, but always had problems with his coworkers and bosses. He did have a few girlfriends. A couple of them had children, which he actually treated them pretty well, and he was considered a decent boyfriend when he wasn't drinking. But when he was drinking, he was very abusive and was often kicked out by his girlfriends over the years for his violent and belittling behavior, and he often ranted of his hatred for his family to them. Garavito suffered from symptoms of psychosis, paranoia, and depression, leading him to several suicide attempts and being hospitalized several times over his life. Some of his suicide feelings were related to his lack of achievement and because he did want to start a family, but he suffered erectile dysfunction with his female partners when he was drunk. Garavito later obtained employment in 1980 at a supermarket in a town in Colombia called Armenia, where he received 2-hour lunch breaks on Thursday and Sunday afternoons. He briefly dated a woman there, but things didn't work out because he didn't make enough money, so he ended up sexually assaulting more boys to feel better for his grief during these lunch breaks. During this period, he said he felt constant urges to molest children, often while working. And in the autumn of 1980, he began carrying razor blades, candles, and lighters in order to torture his victims further. And he even removed a tooth to bite them more effectively. By the early 90s, he had molested over 200 boys, but hadn't killed anyone yet. In the early part of his life, he was ironically a pretty religious Christian guy and read the Bible often to try to find answers for what he was doing, but later turned more to Satanism. He had basically used a Ouija board during one of his episodes of psychosis And Satan asked him if he wanted to serve him, and Garavito said yes, and Satan responded by saying, "Kill, that with killing many things may come." Garavito would later perform satanic rituals when killing the children that were blood sacrifices. So on October 1st, 1992, is when Garavito tried to attempt his first murder of a young boy who had been selling sweets and cigars to passerbys. In a state of drunkenness, he lured the youth, who he planned on bringing to a wooded lot before being interrupted and beaten by local police, one of whom hit him over the head with a revolver. As Garavito bled, they then stole 1,000 pesos, a watch, and a ring from him before letting him go from the police station. Obviously, this was a huge mistake, and he should have been properly booked, and history might have changed possibly, but things were so corrupt there in Colombia, especially in the 90s, that it's not really a big surprise. So just 3 days later, on October 4th, 1992, is when he committed his first murder. He had spotted 13-year-old Juan Carlos walking near a bazaar where he had been drinking. According to Garavito, the reflection of the moonlight in the river had invoked a strange force within him, reminding him of his childhood and enraging him. I assume this was some part of psychosis. He followed the child, buying synthetic rope and a butcher's knife on the way, which is crazy. And he offered this kid between 500 and 1,000 pesos, which is basically pennies, but probably a lot to, obviously a really poor kid. So this kid left the crowded area where he was at and went with Garavito to a remote area near a local railroad. And this is where he was later found with his front teeth knocked out, severe cuts to his rectum and throat, and his genitals severed. Garavito alleged he blacked out and wept upon discovering blood on his clothes the next morning. And this is the beginning of a killing spree that would go on for the next 7 years, that also included victims in Ecuador and Venezuela. So according to Garavito, he primarily targeted children of humble backgrounds who were like working class, homeless, peasants, or orphan. So basically poor kids. And he would look for the children and lure them away by bribing them with like things like money or candy or jobs because of a force within him. He reportedly molested young boys with cute faces and blue or green eyes, and he boasted of his penchant for innocent-looking children with blondish skin and hair. He was afraid of the dark, so he'd approach them in broad daylight in public places ranging from the countryside to crowded city streets. He would also drink brandy near school zones on evenings to wait for unwitting victims. To prevent people from getting suspicious, he would change his disguises often, ranging from a Catholic priest to a school teacher to an elderly man, to more effectively lure the victims. Once he got the trust of the child, he would bring them to a secluded area or a mass grave site and encourage them to talk about their personal life and other things until they got tired and vulnerable. And after drinking about a half a bottle of brandy, he would bound the children, intimidate them with a knife as he fondled and sometimes masturbated over them. So I'll go into a little bit of the details of what he did. You might want to skip this part. So he often molested and tortured them simultaneously for prolonged periods. Besides a knife, he stabbed them with a screwdriver in their rear end, hands, feet, and also cut their buttocks with broken blades. Often while they were still alive, he would cut off their genitals and place them in the child's mouth. They were extensively beaten, stabbed, burned, trampled, and often showed deep cuts in the back, stomach, and throat. In some cases, they were sexually abused as their intestines poured out of their stomach because they had been impaled from the behind with various things like screwdrivers or whatever. Garavito would climax at times when he had decapitated the child alive or slit their throat, and then before leaving, he would put the genitals in the mouth of the severed head. Often containers of lubricant were found near the bodies, along with empty bottles of cheap Colombian brandy. So one of the reasons he was able to get away with this is because he went to many different towns around Colombia, mostly in the West, and because he had disguises, but also because Colombia had been in decades and decades of civil war, basically. And so a lot of people who are missing weren't even reported missing because there was so much chaos. However, authorities were aware that there was some problems with missing children as early as the 80s. And later in 1998 is when they found one of the first mass graves of dozens of children and then a couple others in different locations in Colombia. This sparked a huge investigation, and what authorities assumed was probably a group of people, like an international child sex trafficking ring or a satanic cult or something like that. Garavito had made a big mistake at one of the grave sites in 1999. He had killed 3 boys in that area, and after he had killed this last one, he passed out drunk with a cigarette lit, and it started a fire on the sugarcane field he was laying on. So he not only burned himself, but the area, and as he fled, he left the knife, which was a murder weapon, and some money, his burnt glasses, short shoes, and underwear. And there was also some receipts and a note which contained one of his girlfriend's address. So they questioned his girlfriend, who hadn't seen him in a few months, but she gave him a suitcase he had left there. And inside were some personal things, including pictures of young boys, detailed journals of his murders, and tally marks of his victims. They went to his last known address, but he had already left. But they did look out a few days later when Garavito was arrested on unrelated charges of attempted rape against a 12-year-old boy. He had basically kidnapped this boy who was selling lottery tickets and brought him in a taxi to a secluded area in the countryside. I have no idea why the cab driver wouldn't be suspicious. But anyway, he had been torturing and yelling at this boy, and a 16-year-old homeless kid was nearby and heard them, and so he threw rocks at him. And so Garavito chased him with the knife, and the 2 boys had run away to a farmhouse nearby where there was a 12-year-old girl there, and they hid inside. And Garavito got to that farmhouse where the 12-year-old girl was, and she said that they had ran by and were in the woods. He ran into the woods and ended up getting lost. They called the police, and by the time the police got there, he was finally finding his way out of the forest, and they apprehended him. So they already had some of his things from before, like his glasses and other things that matched his vision and specific problem with his eyes. And the DNA that they had for like the shoes and underwear and pants and brandy bottles were his, and his DNA was on the boys in all of these graves, basically. So later on, he's in prison and he was interrogated for 12 hours. And while they were reading out his crimes, he eventually broke down crying, like you'll see here. And he admitted to at least 140 victims. He was later found guilty of 138 of the 172 accounts, but he might have killed as many as 200, who, as I mentioned, were mostly boys, but there were a few girls and adults. He was sentenced to 1,853 years, the lengthiest of any sentence in Colombian history, but Colombian law limits imprisonment to 40 years. So he could have been eligible for parole in 2023, a couple years ago, when he had served 3/5 of his sentence, and his sentence was reduced because he helped the police find other victims, and he had good behavior. And since he knew he might be getting out of prison around that time, a couple years ago, he told the press and other people he considered running for office when he got out to try to help abused children, and also thought of becoming a pastor. And so this guy who potentially killed 200 kids and raped another 200 might have been able to run for office. Now, I imagine no one would vote for him, obviously, but it's just crazy either way. And he was close to getting out in 2023, and the only reason why he didn't was because a judge blocked him from leaving because he hadn't paid the fines to victims. But he still might have been able to get out, like, in the last year or two. So towards the end of his life, he was suffering from eye cancer and leukemia. And thank God, I usually wouldn't thank God for this, but he did die in a hospital on October 12th, 2023 at the age of 66. Probably just a year or two before he might have gotten out. So since then, Colombia has increased its prison sentences to 60 years for these like really exceptional crimes of like mass murder. But generally, it's still the case that you get 40 years maximum, and you could get out earlier for like good behavior, for health reasons, or becoming a Christian, etc. And if that story's not bad enough, there was another serial killer from Colombia I found named Pedro Lopez, who killed and raped 100 to 300, mostly young girls in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Around the same time Garavito did this, and he was sentenced and went to jail in Ecuador because that's where he was found, and he got even a shorter sentence. Unbelievable. Like, got out after like a dozen years. So maybe the next video I'll do on that guy, Pedro Lopez. So it's no wonder to me that some of these countries have a lot of crime, because this sentencing in many places seems quite ridiculous to me. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is the first one I've made in at least 6 months because I've been so busy, mostly doing e-bike tours out at Red Rocks, which isn't far from Denver, Colorado. If you're ever out this way and interested, I have a link below for that. But I'll try to do a few more videos, and in the winter I might think of doing tours in somewhere like El Salvador or something, so I might even make a new channel for that, so you can check out that. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you next time.